Hey, it's Mike here, and today, the MAHA diet, or the Make America Healthy Again diet by RFK Jr., the current health secretary. We're going to talk about the things they get right, some things, and then a lot of things that they get very wrong in it. And with Thanksgiving coming up, it's good to be reminded of one of RFK's favorite health foods, a turkey deep fried in beef tallow for 40 minutes.
This is how we cook the MAHA way. This is beef tallow fat. Put it in very slowly. Let it drain a little. Perfect.
We're also going to cover the ongoing dietary guidelines debacle with RFK, which some have categorized as an attack on beans, an attack on legumes, which, for me, would definitely cross the line. So we're going to investigate that and see, are RFK's health claims valid, or are they RF cray? Let's go. Look, I understand why RFK and his health culture could be appealing. He exercises, he talks about how processed foods are bad. I was going to take on food corporations, all things that I'm proponents of. He's not from a health agency. Maybe he's going to shake things up, but we can see from things like his educational background why he might be falling for some pseudoscientific Dr. Ozzy type claims out there. And yeah, specifically, he has a Bachelor of Arts in Literature and History, as well as some law degrees, meaning me, a random YouTuber with a Master of Public Health, has more health schooling than the head of health in the United States. And he comes out with claims like Tylenol or acetaminophen causing autism.
It's not this positive that causes autism. It is so suggestive that anybody who takes this stuff during pregnancy, unless they have to, is irresponsible. There are 15 rodent studies
using some largely older and loosely correlated associational data and then characterizing that as causal, while ignoring newer studies like this one that takes confounders into play and even shows a lower rate of autism for higher Tylenol use during pregnancy. There's a pattern of doing that, which in terms of critical thinking, you wouldn't expect coming from somebody with multiple law degrees, but here we are. I do want to add, since filming this, RFK has walked his statements back, saying that there isn't sufficient evidence to say that it's causal, but it's still highly suggestive and that people should be careful, just so you guys know. Anyway, we can move on to just the topic of food. We can leave all of the other topics behind for other people to cover. And as I've joked about before, he has a penchant for just eating random, wild, or exotic animals, or just carrying around corpses, whether we're talking about a dead bear or a dead whale. And that is likely the same type of behavior that got him his brainworm, which is most likely a pork tapeworm larval cyst. So it's not like the little earthworm that people more or less imagine it as crawling around in his brain, but it's still funny to imagine it that way. Let me out of here, please. Am I swimming in beef tallow? But first, let's hit on the positives. Why not? First of all, that he supports whole food consumption. Obviously, I do as well. I wrote Mike's whole vegan cookbook a while back. However, that does have a flip side of over-demonizing all processed foods, which aren't necessarily unhealthy. We'll cover that in a bit. But another supporting point is that he's helped get rid of these petroleum-based food dyes. Let's say that we just really don't need these. We have other ways to make food dyes, and then we do have some studies showing some negative behavioral correlations with certain ones. I do think it's a bit over fear-mongering to just say they're all bad. So it might be overcautious. I do feel like it's probably gonna have a net positive if it has an effect. And another one is he is trying to remove this loophole for getting generally recognized as safe in a self-certified fashion for corporations. So companies can really be their own policemen in terms of a new ingredient that they're introducing being safe. The problem is he's introduced something else which might also be problematic. RFK DRAS, generally recognized as pseudoscientific. If it doesn't have science, it must be right. All right, let's get right into that whole dietary guidelines issue, because he is, of course, very influential with that. And we have this 2024 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report. He said it's too long, and one of the main recommendations they were making in there was to take beans, legumes, peas, etc., and move them from the vegetable category into the protein category. And this is amazing because we have a bunch of different experts on this committee with different leanings. In the report, the pro-bean push is obvious, also citing the health benefits, as well as recommending less red and processed meat. And it was a pretty big step forward, and he just went, no, I'm gonna shred that up, it's too long. He said it should only be about 4 pages long, which made it seem like he wasn't aware that there is a 5-page summary that's usually made of these reports. And this is where incompetence comes in as well, because RFK claimed that he's going to get stuff out in summer and then fall, and then now it's before the end of the year. And are we even going to see that? I would bet no. And while it was a large document, many have inferred that RFK is just not a supporter of beans instead of meat. He's pushed animal protein and animal fat again and again and again. But it's good to remember that yes, legumes are a good source of protein. I'm still alive after 16 years vegan. And on the dietary guidelines, RFK said, quote, new dietary guidelines that are common sense that stress the need to eat saturated fats of dairy, of good meat, of fresh meat and vegetables. When we release those, it will give everybody the rationale for driving it into our schools. Yes, you heard that right. Stressing the need to eat saturated animal fat, which brings me to perhaps his biggest crusade, the beef tallow crusade, which as a result has led to replacing the seed oils in Steak and Shake's fryers to beef tallow.
To switch to traditional ingredients like beef tallow.
Oh, by the way, here you go.
And in terms of beef tallow saturated fat, we're talking about 6 grams per tablespoon, which is about a third of many authorities' upper limit recommendation. So we can only do rough projections of the exorbitantly high amount of saturated fat in his deep fried turkey. Sometimes I dream of popping out of his ear and jumping into that boiling vat of beef tallow, but alas, I am trapped here. And of course, the high saturated fat in beef tallow, like butter, increases LDL or bad cholesterol, higher levels of which are causally linked to atherosclerosis. And it's important to note that the studies that found that in many cases are Mendelian randomized controlled trials. They are genetically randomized and are capable of determining causation, unlike the weak associations that he's used to claim causation in the past and all the time. I can now confirm that what was once cerebral spinal fluid is now just cerebral saturated fat. That's why I'm stuck in place and can't escape. And a point I've been thinking about with food in general is that each year I estimated we take about 50,000 bites of food, and it's obviously really hard to keep track of all the macronutrients and calories in those. And then we just hope that our body composition is going to remain healthy or get even healthier, but perhaps we could have a little bit of help with something that can keep track of metrics as well. And that brings me to the Hume Body Pod, which is of course today's sponsor. It is a body analyzer that has 8 points of contact using electrical impedance to estimate your body composition, looking at a ton of different areas of measurement, not just your body fat and your muscle mass, which I think are super interesting, but also things like your visceral fat in particular, which is disease promoting, as well as your skeletal mass, which I think is really important. Just abstractly thinking, am I doing enough to support bone health versus actually keeping track of it are two very different things. It has 98% the accuracy of medical grade scans, and you can simply stand on it and grab the handle, which I'll show you right now. And then it gives you reports which you can track over time. And I just went to Europe and didn't work out at all. And unfortunately can see that I lost a little bit of muscle mass. And you can get some AI actionable insights. And if you would like to try Hume's Body Pod, you can click the link below and use the code MikeTheVegan, which stacks for up to 50% off, but it's only valid for the next 7 days. All right. And I should mention, he's saying that you should eat beef tallow in lieu of quote unquote seed oils. And as somebody who has put out health warnings about processed oil consumption in the past, especially focusing on saturated fat consumption, I think that this is a step in the wrong direction. We can see studies like this one on over 500,000 people showing that butter, that animal fat there, which he also supports the consumption of, leading to an increased risk of heart disease death by 7% per tablespoon. Well, canola oil, for example, was moving the needle in the opposite direction, the healthier direction. Anyway, let's move on to the whole raw milk issue here, because he's pushed it harder than I think any other public figure, at least that I'm aware of. Quote, raw milk is active in bioavailable enzymes, probiotics, and is being aggressively suppressed. Why might it be suppressed? And yes, from the CDC itself, raw cow's milk has 840 times the risk of leading to illness that pasteurized cow's milk has. Pasteurization isn't any crazy nuclear process. It's just shortly heating it up to 135 degrees and letting it go back down again, lowering the risk of pathogens passing on. From right here behind his eyeball, I've had to witness him slam down gallons after gallons of raw milk. Oh, what these poor wormy eyes have seen. And this just puts us at a risk of so many more infectious diseases that we don't need to be at risk of. For example, the bird flu that recently occurred, in which cats that were fed raw cow's milk in a lot of cases died. So we really don't need to just open up this avenue and have everybody drinking raw milk. And just a recent case in Florida from earlier this year, we have over 20 people getting sick from raw milk, 7 were hospitalized, 2 had severe complications. And RFK is really into like manliness and working out, and it is just good to remind people that cow's milk from this study was shown to lower testosterone in men. So Lap that up. Anyway, moving on.
I just want to add, maybe you noticed this weird hyper-politicization of neutral health pages for the first time that I've seen. Regardless of your stance, I just don't think this is the place for that.
Now I want to talk a little bit about processed foods. He's always throwing out the term ultra-processed foods. It's sort of an open-ended definition and just an overall fear of processed foods. I understand why you would want to push that out there because there are a lot of really unhealthy processed foods. A processed food eating pattern is certainly less healthy than one with more whole foods. But there comes a point where just demonizing all processed foods could even be counterproductive to health. For example, vinegar, which lowers blood glucose, is an extremely processed food. If you think about the processing situation, you're taking grape juice or whatever original feedstock that you have, and then you are letting it turn into alcohol, and then you're opening it back up to oxygen and letting it go even a step further. So your white vinegar is processed even further than vodka, and yet it is giving us positive health results. So processed is not synonymous with negative health effects, just like how unprocessed doesn't necessarily mean positive. For example, unprocessed poison ivy wouldn't give you a positive health effect. Or how unprocessed raw milk straight from the cow's teat, again, 840 times the risk of illness. And perhaps one of the biggest benefits of focusing on eating whole foods is eating whole plant foods that have fiber. Yet his advice seems to be devoid of increasing fiber consumption because it's pretty clear he's on more or less of a low carb diet. He's constantly eating low carb foods. He doesn't seem to directly use those terms, but over and over again is the pattern we see him eating. But at least he eats vegetables in this day and age. That is actually nice to hear. Now I want to get into what is really a current development, and that is the lab-grown, aka cultured meat situation. And he is, of course, as with his political side of the aisle, very against this type of meat. He says, quote, "Lab-grown meat offers private corporations the opportunity to place intellectual property rights on meat development and thus create a financial windfall at the expense of human health." Also saying, quote, "Lab-grown meat is a pipe dream." Actually, it's a petri dish dream. Again, for those that aren't aware, we have about 80 billion land animals that we raise and slaughter and kill for meat each year. But with a single little turkey feather or chicken feather or sample of an animal, you could continuously grow meat that does not hurt animals indefinitely. And they've now figured out how to do that in a plant-based medium, so you're not growing it in weird extracts from animals. So now we just need to scale up the technology and make it financially feasible, and it's starting to happen more than ever. For example, the California-based company Mission Barns has made cultivated pork, and it is going to be doing tasting starting November 1st, essentially every month for the coming months. And people are going to be able to taste it for $13.99. And we have recent studies like this one showing that with the growth medium coming down in cost, this could eventually be cheaper than growing entire animals for food. And that could be a lot sooner than we think. I know it's not natural, but I also don't think our current way of growing animals is natural. And this, of course, has met a lot of resistance from RFK and his political allies, who have now outlawed lab-grown or cultured meat in at least 7 states now. However, I believe that the main motivation to do this is actually, as we've seen with Governor Ron DeSantis directly with the cattle ranchers, is that they want less competition for those cattle ranchers so that they can maintain dominance in their space. I too have maintained dominance in my space. It's not all it's cracked up to be. This is a literal prison. Please release me. So at first glance, MAHA and RFK Jr.'s health advice appears to be benign. Oh, exercise more, eat less processed foods. Underneath that, and really his main unique claims that he's pushing, are things like consume raw milk, which has a way higher risk of illness. Just guzzle that beef tallow, which is of course super high saturated fat, when heart disease is our leading killer. It's not gonna be helping anyone out. And really this dietary ethos that he's put out there is along with this general political anti-veganism push that we see, whether it is financial for cattle ranchers or just people's cultural bias against a vegan diet, all coming together to the same side of a coin. I don't know what his dietary guideline recommendations are going to be, but I have a feeling that they are going to be very off-base, very non-scientific, perhaps oversimplified, and not really help out everyday Americans. Like he says, it's going to be 4 pages. Page 1 is probably going to be raw milk, drink as much as you can. Page 2 is just going to be a picture of a giant turkey dunked in beef tallow. Page 3 is just going to be like food dyes scary. And then the last page is just going to say seed oils with a little skull and crossbones in the middle. So let me know what you think about what I've covered in this video. There's a bunch of more health claims in and around this whole culture and from RFK Jr. in particular. Feel free to share them down below. And of course, if you would like to try that Hume Body Pod, you can just click the link below and use the code MikeTheVegan, which again stacks to up to 50% off for just the next 7 days. Also, feel free to like, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Yes, I can confirm that there are no thoughts going on inside of this cranium. Is that a salmonella that just swam by?